So, good evening, everyone. My name is Evan Zhu, a rising senior at McLean High School, and I'm with my partner, Jeffrey Zhang, a rising sophomore at Oakton High School. So we are part of the program BranchOut. So BranchOut is a nonprofit program with Veritas education leaders that was co-founded by Dr. Yushin Wu and Mr. Richard Wang. In 2015, it grew from 20 student volunteers to over 150 in 4 short summers. Our high school student mentors come from over 40 different schools across 5 states.
We started out as a peer STEM mentoring program, working at the community centers, homeless shelters, and county summer credit recovery programs, and have expanded into a community outreach program to promote cross-cultural understanding by featuring community heroes, creating research articles, and organizing career panels. As an award-winning community engagement program, we have received endorsement from U.S. Congress, including Senator Tim Kaine and former Congresswoman Barbara Comstock. Additionally, our Innovator program won the U.S. Congressional App Challenge Award last year.
And as part of BranchOut's goals to promote civic engagement, community, and STEM education, we are so excited to be presenting this very informative career panel. Psychology, which is the study of our mental processes and behaviors through the science of the mind, will and always has been an important part of our modern society. The field analyzes the biological, environmental, and social factors that affect the brain, relating them to human actions and emotions. Psychologists have a wide range of careers available to them, which include forensic psychology, clinical, consumers, sports, and social workers. Psychologists are greatly needed as they play vital roles in hospitals, schools, and other facilities. They help us understand the different factors that can impact the human mind and behavior. And their work helps create more efficient and safe workspaces, motivate people to accomplish their goals, and improve mental health. Our first speaker will be Dr. Esther Barca. Barkat is a retired professor of psychology and currently a school psychologist for Fairfax County Public Schools, specifically Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology. Ms. Barkat has published several articles concerning South Asian families and has presented papers at several local, national, and international conferences. So Dr. Barkat, it's an honor to have you with us today. Could you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, as you already said, my name is Esther Barca. I'm originally from Pakistan. I came to the United States in 1973 after I got married. I was very young at that time. And when I came here, I already had undergraduate and teaching training. We do separate year of teaching training after our bachelor degree. Came to the United States, wanted to get further education. I enrolled myself in West Virginia University in educational psychology department and did my doctorate there. And then I found a job in mental health institution, not an institution, but mental health services agency. And there came a school psychologist who was the head of the department of the Marshall University. And he talked me into doing school psychology. And I ended up doing further education to get my school psychology certification. I'm nationally certified school psychologist and I'm licensed to practice in West Virginia. I'm also licensed in Virginia, but in Virginia, I can also only work in school systems. But in West Virginia, I can have my private practice. Majority of my work has been teaching in universities and colleges. And comparatively speaking, I have done less years of work in school systems. So I retired in 2014. I came to Virginia because most of my family lives in Fairfax County. And after 2 years, I got kind of bored and I needed some stimulation, mental stimulation, and I applied for Fairfax County schools. And I got a job and they appointed me to Thomas Jefferson High School, which is a science and technology school. And I love my job there. So I am enjoying it and we'll see how long I stay.
Thank you for that. Our second featured panelist who will be speaking for us tonight is Professor Andrea Halpern. Professor Halpern is a professor of psychology at Bucknell University and has authored and co-authored numerous research papers regarding music and cognitive processes. Professor Halpern, thank you for being with us today. Would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you for having me. As mentioned, I'm a professor at Bucknell University. I got my undergraduate degree in psychology at Brandeis University and my PhD at Stanford. And I've been at Bucknell for most of my professional life, although we are privileged to have sabbaticals. So I've spent years at other institutions such as UCLA, Montreal Neurological Institute, University of London, and most recently University of Maryland and Durham University in the northeast of England. My research area is cognition and cognitive neuroscience, so mind and brain. Was originally trained in the area of memory, which means my fundamental kind of home interest. I think everything comes down to memory. What would we be without it? And I'm very interested in how the mind and brain processes nonverbal information. That's why I use music a lot, sometimes art. But I also have interests in what the brain is doing when you're imagining a tune. That's one of my specialty areas, is auditory imagery. And I have interests in looking at these processes in healthy older age, as well as certain kinds of dementias, and the emotional processing, so how we process and convey emotional messages this way. And recently, I've also been looking at why some of us are better pitch matchers than others. And so I've been studying, kind of listening to a lot of bad singers, but in the sense of pitch matching, but trying to figure out how that very interesting sensory motor system lives. And in my other life, of course, we have a pretty high teaching load here at Bucknell. So we're an undergraduate, selective undergraduate institution. So I do a fair amount of teaching. And I'm also in the editorial world. I'm an editor at the journal Misperception, and of course do writing and professional service like grant reviewing and so forth.
Thank you. That was a great description and insight into your life, and we really appreciate it. So our third speaker who will be joining us this evening is Dr. Beverly Parker-Lewis. So Dr. Parker-Lewis is a school psychologist at McLean High School, and her experience in psychology is extraordinary. In particular, her past work with diverse school settings definitely sets her apart. So Dr. Parker-Lewis, it is a great honor to have you with us today. And would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
It's my honor to be here to speak with you and to interact with you. So I thank you for inviting me to do that. I have a pretty diverse background as far as my education and training is concerned and experiences. Started out in North Carolina, where I was born and raised. Went to undergrad and grad school in Ohio, starting out with an undergraduate degree in mathematics, loving numbers, and then moving on to master's degree in educational psychology. Then moved to Michigan State, where I got a PhD in counseling psychology. I stayed on there and worked there for 5 years, teaching graduate level courses to psychology students. I've worked as a clinical director of a foster care program. I've worked as clinical psychologist in Superior Court in Washington, D.C. I've worked in outpatient mental health. I've worked in the school settings, obviously. Just a pretty well-rounded background as far as my experiences. I worked with Fairfax County for 20 years as a school psychologist, retired in 2016, can't even remember now. Stayed out a year and then had a request from Fairfax County to come back on a part-time basis, which I'm doing now, working at McLean, working with what we call our Tier 3 students who have significant intensive mental health needs. I think I'm a great match between who I am and what I do. And I love that. One of my biggest things that I love to do is work puzzles, jigsaw, crosswords, Sudoku. A puzzle is my thing. And that's how I see my work as a psychologist, is taking the pieces of puzzles that people bring to me, putting those together, to help them to put it together, to make some kind of a picture so that they can understand what life is looking like and maybe what they want it to look like. So that's who I am. And I am a sports idiot. Love, love, love sports.
Again, thank you for being here, Dr. Parker-Lewis. I think the analogy between kind of puzzles and psychology really makes it a lot more clear. Our fourth speaker who will be joining us this evening is Ms. Beth Werfel. Ms. Werfel is the acting school psychology supervisor for Region 3 of Fairfax County Public Schools and has 25 years in school psychology. She has worked with elementary, middle, and high schoolers. Ms. Werfel, thank you for coming to our panel. Could you please briefly introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me this evening. It's great to be a panelist with the other panel members. Dr. Halpern, I think I'd like to take a couple of your classes, maybe listening to you talk about what you do. And I've also had the privilege of working with Dr. Barkat and Dr. Parker-Lewis in Fairfax County. So let's see a little bit about myself. So when I was growing up, a big value in my family was helping others. And so my parents would often give myself and my siblings the message that they were fine with whatever we did in life, as long as we were doing something where we were helping other people. And so I really took that to heart when I considered what I wanted to do for a career. And I have a younger brother who is absolutely fine now as an adult, but he struggled significantly throughout his school career. And I remember reflecting on that, thinking that there had to be some better options or some better ways for teachers and school staff to help support him or even support my parents. And so when I heard about the profession of school psychology, I thought that sounded like a good match for me, and it definitely has been. I did my undergraduate work also at a small school in Western Pennsylvania called Grove City College, and then I did my graduate work at Kent State University in Ohio, and I did some work at Akron Children's Hospital in their child and adolescent psychiatric unit. I did psychological assessments there before I started my first school psychology job in Durham, North Carolina. I worked in Durham for 3 years before I moved to DC, and I've been with Fairfax County Public Schools since my move to DC, which was back in 1997. So I can't believe how much time has gone by. But I've worked, like you were saying, in middle, elementary, and high school. And most recently, I've been in a supervisory role where I actually supervised 41 this year school psychologists. Fairfax County hires a lot of school psychologists. It's a very large school district, as most of you probably know. And so it's just been a privilege for me to help teach and learn from other school psychologists. So thanks again for having me.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for your wonderful introductions. So we're thrilled to have you all this evening, and I'm sure you'll provide more excellent information regarding psychology. And we'll be asking you some general questions to start off. And if anyone in the audience thinks of a question, you may type it into the chat and we'll get to it later. So audience members will have the opportunity to ask questions at the end. So we have an order for these questions. So if we could have Dr. Barkat followed by Professor Halpern, then Dr. Parker-Lewis, and then last but not least, Ms. Werfel, like our introductions, it would be great. So now let's get started. So our first question is a very general question. So why did you choose to study psychology? And Dr. Barkat, would you like to start?
I think you might be muted.
So what I was saying, that my parents, especially my mother, thought that I should be a medical doctor. And that wasn't my cup of tea, basically. And after first year of college, I just kind of was lost what I want to do, which field I want to go. And I tried political science, didn't like it. I took a couple courses, then I took some other courses. And a friend of mine said, she was taking psychology classes, and she said, would you like to try psychology? I said, okay. So here I am after that. And since then, I just loved it. And when I came to States, I continued with that. My first two professors, I thought that when I came to States, I thought that I'm just going to try and see whether I can even handle American education or not. So I entered in university as a special student without a degree program. And my first professor was B.F. Skinner's daughter. And Miss Vargas, and her, and there was another professor, they kind of created an environment which I kind of enjoyed, and I thought, okay, this is the field I'm going to go, and I continue to do that. And I still remember that first time when she invited B.F. Skinner in our class to speak, I was just kind of saying, who is this very thin, fragile kind of a person sitting in my class? And I can still kind of see him sitting. And Miss Vargas, Julia Vargas, she had written books on behaviorism and all that. And she was my first mentor, so to speak, and helped me to continue this. And then when, as I said, as I finished my doctorate at WVU and got a job in mental health agency and worked with the dropout prevention programs and teenage parenting, and helped write grants to get funding to help parents to how to raise the children, the parents who were themselves were teenagers. And that's where I met Dr. O'Keefe, who was the chairperson of the Department of School Psychology in Marshall University. And he kind of led me into school psychology program. And he told me, he said, you just need to have 15 more courses or hours, no, 15 more hours, and you'll be fine. I ended up taking 35. I was so interested in what I was studying. And after that, I got a job as a school psychologist in a couple places. But as I said, most of my professional life has been in university teaching. And I loved both of them. It helped me because my husband's job was such that we moved from one place to another. And sometime I got a school psychology job, sometime I got a teaching in a university job. And so it worked out for me either way.
I guess I'll jump in. I was hooked on experimental psychology in my first course. I was lucky enough to go to a liberal arts university, Brandeis University, where we took lots of different courses. And at that time, introductory psychology was a full year. The first half, you could take it in either order. The first half was sort of more perception and cognition. The second half kind of social developmental. But the first course I took was the more perception cognition. And even though we spent 9 entire weeks on the visual system, which might have been a little much for an introductory course, I really was hooked by this idea of being a scientist and trying to study something that's not easy to see. How do we see inside the mind? And I found, like my colleague, I like puzzles. And that's one of the puzzles that I like, is how do I get inside something that's not visible, which is your mind. I also study brain, which I can sort of see, but we need some fancy machines for that. And I'd like to put in a word for early mentorship. My professor in university kind of saw something in me, and I'll never forget on my cognition class, I must have done well enough on the midterm that when he handed back the papers, he silently put a gift on my desk, and it turned out to be the book, How to Lie with Statistics. So I knew I took that in the spirit with which it was given. It's actually a tongue-in-cheek book. You're not really supposed to lie. And that's something that although I'm interested in many things, I'm a musician, I love the arts and history. This is something where I love being able to set my own problems. if I'm bored, it's my own fault, because I'm lucky enough to be able to set up what it is that the next thing is that I want to look at. I have to have the tools to do it relatively successfully much of the time, but doesn't have to be all the time. And that's something that I've really enjoyed. And then I can combine that with my mentoring, passing it along to my students, having them in the lab in my classroom. And also being a professor, I get to travel and work with colleagues all over the world. I have many international collaborations, especially in this day and age. And that's where I do my brain stuff. I don't have access to neuroimaging and so forth at my university, but I'm very lucky to collaborate with people who have that. So it's been a really great journey, and I haven't run out of ideas yet.
Okay. My journey began with my love of math. I was fortunate enough to have a high school math teacher who really turned me on to numbers, really, really loved them. So when I started out, I went into math as an undergrad major. My decisions on where I went and what I studied were somewhat driven by money. And I don't want to sound greedy in regards to that. What I want to say is that my family couldn't afford to pay for me to go to college. So therefore, I had to make sure that I did well in school so that I could get financial support to go to school. So I went to a little small school in Ohio and finished my undergrad there with a major in math and an undergraduate major in computer science. Loved both of those, but found that it really didn't allow me to be involved with people at the level and the way that I enjoyed being with people. So I then got an opportunity. I got a grant to go to another university in Ohio, Bowling Green, to do a master's in educational psych. So it kind of put the numbers there, and it also allowed me to be able to interact with people. So it kind of began to formulate a bit for me. And I did a master's there and loved that, and attended a couple of professional conventions, APA, which is very, very large, and then Association of Black Psychologists, which is another large meeting, and met a few people at those meetings who turned me on to some information about a grant through fellowship through the National Institute of Mental Health. I got a full ride to go to Michigan State University to get my PhD. It included all tuition, books, fees, monthly stipend, and I was able to also supplement my daily needs with a graduate assistantship. And I got that in counseling psychology. So that's how I evolved into psychology. And it was one of the best unplanned moves in my life, because I ended up in a profession that I absolutely, absolutely love. And someone before I retired gave me this sign. I don't know if you can see it or not. You probably can't see it, but it says, "I believe you can only be great at something you love." And that was a quote by Maya Angelou. And I keep it with me all the time because I love what I do. And I try to do my best in what I do. And I also live by the same mantra that Ms. Werfel lives by. And that's paying it forward, having gratitude, helping others. It's just a part of my fiber and a part of my being. So it has all worked out well for me.
All right, so I'm next. So I told you a little bit about kind of why I was interested in psychology to begin with. I'll pick up, I guess, my freshman year in undergrad. I was a psychology major, and I met with my advisor just for, a regular check-in, I guess, for the year. And he asked me what I was planning to do with my psychology degree, because he was like, there's really not a lot you can do with just a psychology degree. You're most likely going to have to go to graduate school, which wasn't necessarily in my calculation at that time. And so I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do in terms of how I wanted to use my psychology degree. Anyway, way back when, in the olden days, they had these big books that had like all the careers in them, and you could look through and see what your careers are. So I went to the psychology section and looked through all the psychology degrees, and some sounded interesting, like organizational psychology sounded really interesting to me. Educational psychology sounded really interesting, developmental psychology. And then I saw this thing called school psychology. As I read more about it, it talked about, there's coursework in education and curriculum and coursework in child development and coursework in, cognitive development and coursework in assessments. A big part of a school psychologist's job is completing psychological assessments to see if a student may have a disability that would require special education services. And so that kind of fit right in with kind of my earlier concerns or questions about, what was going on with my brother as he was growing up and what kind of supports could have been in place for him when he was a child that would have made school easier or better, more satisfying for him. And so school psychology just really stuck out to me. And I think one other thing that stuck out to me in terms of school psychology, and for me, I've always been a really practical person. I knew that I wanted to hopefully be a mom, which I am a mom. But when I was 20, I wasn't sure if I was going to be a mom, but I wanted to be a mom. And I also wanted to work, but I wanted to have a career where I could have good work-life balance, and working in the field of education where there is that kind of ebb and flow of there's the school year from late August to June, and you have your summer break and you have your spring break and you have your winter break. That sounded like that's something I could, if I wanted to be a working mom, I could manage that schedule a little bit better. That's absolutely, I found that absolutely to be true. I've been able to balance work and family life and, have good balance and work-life satisfaction throughout my career.
Wow, it's kind of amazing to see all these people from different backgrounds all coming together for a love of psychology and humans. And so we're going to move on to our next question. What kind of advice would you offer to students looking to study psychology? And I guess, how is the studying? How difficult is the major? Dr. Barkat, would you like to start?
Can you repeat your question, please?
Oh yeah, sure. So what kind of advice would you offer to students looking to study psychology? And how is how difficult is the major of psychology?
I think it's a personal interest. We can encourage people to take psychology as their major. My interest blossomed because of the kind of professors I had, the people who guided me. So it all depends on people's interest and what they like to do. My interest was to understanding human, their behaviors, how they think, how they process, and it just fascinated me. And one thing which fascinated me was when my professor helped me to interpret one of the assessment I did, and it just came so live to see how things work. So personally, that's all I can say is that one can see what their interest is, where their life is going. And as you have seen that each one of us who has spoken so far, as the things have kind of fell into right places when you are choosing the right profession for yourself and you have a passion about it and you love what you do. What Dr. Parker-Lewis was saying, that when you love something, it just happens for you.
So of course I work with undergraduates all the time. I'm advising 7 incoming neuroscience students tomorrow. I think it's impossible to say, is it a difficult major? I think that is probably very hard to answer. Do you want to get A's in all your courses? And it's harder as opposed to other things. I would say some advice is to get as broad an education in psychology as possible when you're an undergraduate. almost all professional psychology is still true. You need a graduate degree, and in many areas you need a PhD and some masters, but almost no field of psychology would just have the bachelor's. So that's your time to get your broad background. A bit of specific advice I'd give, which may not be popular, is to learn as much about the brain as you can. The more we know about the brain, no matter what area of psychology you're going into, that will benefit you. And our level of understanding of how the brain works is astonishingly rapid. We still many, many more things to learn, but I think some students shy away from that. But no matter where you're going, clinical or forensic or developmental. Another bit of advice that, again, may not be very obvious, but I would not shy away from taking some comparative psychology, that is, learn about other organisms as well. Bucknell is very fortunate to have an animal behavior major. We are one of the few institutions that have primate colonies. And the students really gain a lot by that comparative look. It makes you think about evolution and things we have in common, and just understand general principles. So that's something that may not be your primary interest, but I would include that in your broad training, is to get some exposure to animal behavior as well. Not an obvious answer, I think, but one that I would give.
I wholeheartedly agree with the broad training and the broad classwork, and the more you can broaden your horizons in regards to information and knowledge, I think the better equipped you're going to be to make decisions about where you want to go if psychology appears to be the direction. You definitely have to consider going beyond a bachelor's degree, so expect to spend some time in the classroom and in school if you intend on making a career out of it. The other thing is, think outside of the box in regards to the area of psychology that you might want to pursue. There are so many areas, many you have never heard of. We are probably typical psychologists here, if I can use that kind of word, but there are fields that are just, oh, really? And one day I challenged myself to start with the alphabet and go from A to Z and list an area of psychology under each one. And I pretty much was able to come up with the psychology area for each one of the alphabet. I challenge each one of you to do that too, if that's something you think you might want to do. And for some where I could not come up with a title or an area, I started researching it to find one, and I was able to find a few that I was just really, really surprised about. Rather than saying psychology is difficult, I'd say it's challenging. That's the word I choose to use. Challenging in a lot of different ways, academically, information-wise. It's challenging as far. One of the things that I really like the best is that it taught me a lot about me and how I function and how I operate, which allows me to be able to work better in the field. So those are my takes on your question.
And as I mentioned earlier, I am a very practical person. So this is really good for all of you to know. There is a national shortage of school psychologists. So there are jobs available once students finish school psychology programs. And most school psychologists have a master's degree plus 30 additional hours of work. So you'll end with an educational specialist degree. I did some research this morning, and about over 70% of school psychologists have a master's plus 30 hours. So that would be 60 hours of graduate work for the most part. And then there are also school psychology programs where you can get your doctorate, whether that's a PhD or a PsyD. So that's additional work. All school psychology programs require a 1-year internship, and that is typically done in a school district. Like Fairfax County Public Schools hires interns every school year as well. So in addition to your in-seat classwork, there's some practicum work in a variety of either educational settings, sometimes hospital settings, and then a 1-year internship in a school setting. And like I said, there is a shortage of school psychologists. So there will be jobs available, at least within the next, decade for sure, in the area of school psychology.
I just want to add a point of information, again, that's not well known. It's not necessarily the case you need a master's degree. That is, if you go for your PhD, you don't necessarily need a master's before a PhD. I do not have a master's degree, and maybe half my colleagues do not. So the road to the PhD isn't necessarily as long as you might think. I got my undergraduate in 4 years, my doctorate in 4 years, and then I was out. Many people take longer depending on the program, but that's just something to keep in mind, that it's not necessarily the case. Though, as I said, it's not a degree that I have.
Yeah, and it depends on individual circumstances or situations. I was having kids while I was doing my doctorate. So I did my master's when I had my son, and I did my PhD, completed my PhD when I had my youngest daughter. So that kind of, I took a little longer to complete my doctorate program than I would have otherwise. So it all depends on circumstances as well.
And it's also the case that, at least on the research side, most PhDs are funded. So they pay for you. They pay you rather than you pay them. On the clinical side, it's a much more mixed picture.
And I'll say too, even in the school psychology program I was in, was able to get a graduate assistantship, which paid for my tuition. So there is money and funding available for the graduate work.
Same here, because I was teaching as I was taking classes as well.
Yeah, thank you for all those answers. I'm pretty sure any prospective student that was listening got a bunch of good advice just now. And so we have another question, but it's kind of a different approach. So psychology might not be as clear, as cut and dry to much of the population as like math or science. So what is a common misperception or misconception about psychology, either the major or career? In the same order, preferably.
Okay.
So yeah.
I think I remember people saying that to me, that you are not going to get job. There's no jobs available. If you do psychology, it doesn't pay that much. Some people even said it's not really a science, all kind of things. And when you say I'm going to do major in psychology or sociology, people just think that it's not that as important. And what people don't realize is no matter what we do, psychology is there, in every aspect of our life. And that's why, as Dr. Parker-Lewis was saying, that there is so many branches of psychology. I think maybe we are not promoting enough, or maybe we are not talking about enough, that people don't know that this is a field. First, it's a field where we help people. We help, especially in school psychology, we are looking at helping the needs of young people, the needs of parents, and all kind of educational aspect of it, and psychological aspect of it, mental health aspect of it. So it encompasses actually educational psychology, developmental psychology, clinical psychology, community psychology, behavior analysis. If you look at it, everything comes together in school psychology. So it's very broad based field which we are in. And so we are not boxed in certain areas, so we can expand everywhere. And I think the more we talk about it, the more we educate people about psychology field, the better off we are going to be, because we need psychologists, and especially today in this environment where we are living in.
The most common misconception I run into is that all psychologists are clinicians and doing counseling and patient delivery. So many people out there in the world don't realize that there's many areas of psychology that are research scientists, that we are not sort of direct patient or client delivery. So I have to kind of, if I'm on an airplane and what do you do? I'm a psychologist. So let me tell you my dreams. That's how that conversation kind of goes. And I have to explain that we do all the science, and that I think is a little bit of a misconception. But another slight misconception is the other radical, that if you're a scientist, you're not helping people. And I am not making up the following conversation. Had a student in my office, and she was going on about her career choices, and we're having this meeting, and I'm helping her with this. And she said, I'm not sure I really want to be a professor or research psychologist. I think I want to help people. And I stare at her and I say, what am I doing right now? And I'm not sure she got that irony. that is, you can help people in many ways, not just being a traditional, if you will, what the lay public thinks of as a psychoanalyst or something like that, which is a perfectly respectable thing to do, but it's not the only way to help people. So that's the misconception that I most commonly deal with, I think.
I think you've kind of hit it on the head, exactly what I was thinking, Dr. Halpern, in regards to misconception of people having a pretty narrow view of what psychology, what it is and what you do. And that's why I talked about exploring all of the branches or all of the different fields of psychology, kind of open it. Also in conjunction with that is, I'm not sure how much people understand what it takes in order to be a psychologist. You start out as an undergrad with a study in psychology, but as Ms. Werfel said, you can't do very much with a bachelor's in psychology. The more you get, the more you can do, the more flexibility you have in what you can do in psychology. And that's one of the big things that I think is kind of missing when people say, I want to be a psychologist.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can add too much more other than just I've encountered similar situations where, if I let someone know that I'm a psychologist, they think, oh, are you analyzing me now? Like, what do you know about me that I don't know? Things like that. And I'm like, no, that's not not what I'm doing at all. And the other thing, I guess, working in the schools, often school psychologists kind of get confused with school counselors, and the roles are very distinct. We definitely team with school counselors and school social workers, but each profession has some distinct aspects to that job. So sometimes people ask me like, well, don't you get tired of writing all of those college recommendations? I'm like, I don't have to write any college recommendations. That would be the school counselor who does a lot of that work. So hope that helps answer your question.
Yeah, definitely. It answers all our questions.
All right. I think we're gonna move on to chat box questions now. If anyone wants to type a question in the chat right now, we can get our panelists to answer them if we have time. And I guess we're gonna move on to our questions. First, can you explain to a layperson what the major difference is between a psychologist, psychiatrist, and aside from like prescribing medication, and how do we decide if we should see a psychologist or a psychiatrist?
I think the major people, what they say is that majority of the time it is that when there is some medical diagnosis is concerned, that we are going to see psychiatrists as opposed to psychologists. Yeah, they can do the medication, they prescribe the medication. But we have all the knowledge which we can offer. But since we do not have a medical degree, they do need some prescription written for them, and that's right, that they have to see psychiatrist to do that. And psychiatrists do have a medical degree, whereas psychologists do not have medical degree.
That's very true. Psychiatrists go to after finishing undergrad, they go to med school, and they're the same as a cardiologist, pediatrician, any medical specialist. They specialize in psychiatry. So their training is medically based. Psychologists do not go to medical school. We go to school and pursue degrees in psychology, depending upon clinical counseling, school, whatever area you want to go in. Psychiatrists have hospital privileges. They can admit and treat people in hospitals. They can write prescriptions. And some states now will allow some psychologists to write prescriptions, but that's not a wide, and can admit people to the hospital, but that's not a widely held position. So that's the biggest difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist. And whether or not you should see a psychologist or a psychiatrist depend upon what your issues are, what you feel your needs are. Most psychiatrists prescribe medication and do less treatment, therapy, counseling than do psychologists. Psychologists usually work in conjunction with psychiatrists to make a well-rounded picture. Psychologists do the treatment, psychiatrists do the medication prescriptions. That's the biggest difference that I can see.
Well, I might also add, as these are high school students, you might want to turn that question around and ask, if you're interested in this area, do you want to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist? And that will, again, be a decision about what kind of environment you want to be in, whether you want to do your service delivery, if you will, in the general medical context or in a non-medical context. So that's an interesting career choice. It's a quite different undergraduate preparation, many more basic sciences for medical school, but it's not bad for everyone to have more basic science. So that's something that's, as you go through your undergraduate, you might want to be considering the medical school, clinical psychology, which is a different path than a research psychologist. So they're kind of three basic paths, very, very broadly speaking. So that's something to consider from a career point of view.
And I'll just add to that one, I guess, similarity at this point is that there's currently a shortage of child and adolescent psychiatrists. So there are jobs in that field as well.
Thank you. I'm sure they definitely got their question answered between the psychologist and psychiatrist. So our next question is how to get a teen who refuses to see a psychologist but clearly needs and can benefit from talking to a psychologist, which I'm sure many people have experienced before. So if you could speak up, thank you.
I think it's a relational thing, and it takes what you call a village kind of scenario here, because we do have a stigma attached to mental health, and many people are resistant. They think that if they seek out help from a psychologist or therapist or counselor or anybody, it's a weakness. And how do we educate? In my my placement right now where I'm working, one of my thing is that I start going to classes and talk about all kind of like stress, anxiety, and depression, and all kind of things which children are actually experiencing as just information. When they see that there is somebody whom they can have a face recognition. In our school, we kind of promote this continuously. We do that. So children become, or students become more comfortable reaching out to at least one trusting adult in their school. It could be a teacher, and the teacher starts that conversation and then lead a student to that person whom they feel more comfortable talking to. The counselors are our kind of also a place where students go there anyway, because they need scheduling, they need other kind of academic advising and all that. So if they are feeling stressed out and they need to seek help, they are the one who can encourage them, introduce to the people. And then the other aspect which I put very emphasis is to educate parents. So I do a lot of parenting sessions and educating them that it's not a stigma. So if those kind of conversations are taking place at home, and encouraging that it is just like getting hurt. If you are going to hurt your leg or your arm or something, you are going to take a medicine, you are going to go to doctor. It's the same way if we are stressed out or something is going on, it's okay to go to seek help. So it's in a way community effort to do that, so we can encourage our children. So if we take that stigma away and educate our community, our parents, and in school, our students, which we are right now, we are in our Fairfax County schools, and I'm pretty sure other schools are using social emotional learning. So when we do those kind of lessons and educating, and I think then the less they feel stressed about seeking help from the psychologist or,
I think also in conjunction with what you're saying, Dr. Barkat, is I used to have attitude with my children when I put something on the plate that they never had before, and they looked at it and they'd say, I don't like that. And I would say to them, how do you know you've never had it? So I said, before you come to the conclusion that you don't like it, you need to taste it. And that's kind of the attitude that I would take with my child in regards to seeing if I felt that the child needed to see a psychologist. Let's try it and see what it's like. If you feel that it's not working and you don't like it, then we can talk about not going back. The thing you have to remember is that any psychologist cannot see anybody about everything. You have to find the person that works best with you. And that may take a little going to consultation with a few to do that. So rather than making an appointment and making your child stick with the psychologist, do a consultation with the psychologist to see if this one's going to work. Have her taste a meeting with that psychologist to see what it's about. Have the psychologist explain to the child, the student, the person, the team, what the process is all about and what it's like. Because as Dr. Barkat said, people have in their mind about what psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health people do. I have many times heard someone say, oh, you're a crazy doctor. Well, yeah, I am crazy, but they were really basically saying, you see crazy people. And that's not, I said, I see people like you and me. I could be my own best patient or client if I had to be. So it's important to speak very basically about the process as opposed to it being a really magical kind of process. It's not that, it's a working process.
And I just want to add, I was reading Gloria's question here, which says that it is about, that it is worse to have to explain to people about whatever issues that they are having than the issue themselves. And sometimes it doesn't help. And as what Dr. Parker-Lewis was saying, that you have to try it to see whether it helps or not. And in some cases, I'm not going to say that 100% it helps, because it's also is that I can say or give you all kind of suggestion, all kind of strategies, all the information, But at the end of the day, are you trying to take that advice and doing something about it or not? Or is your problem need more evaluation, like going to a psychiatrist, taking a medication and doing all that? So it is just seeking help, hoping that other person who is listening may be helpful. And sometimes what happens, I tell my students all the time, that you may only need to go there and vent with a person who is objective as opposed to a friend and a relative, because they cannot be objective. So you go to somebody, it's a one-day session, you just tell whatever is on your heart, and you feel lightheaded, and you go and you light-hearted, and you go and you never need to talk to anybody again. But you have this trusting person with whom you can go and share.
All right, so we're almost running out of time, but we're gonna ask one more question and then we can move on to the ending. This question is directed towards Dr. Halpern. I'm sure a lot of people are interested in your work in music and psychology, and they're asking, could you kindly offer any guidance for people interested in both these fields? And could you offer your knowledge on any career opportunities?
Well, thanks for asking that. And interestingly enough, I didn't come to what I study because I'm a musician, although that helps me ask some questions. I actually, at the beginning of my career, was looking around and people were studying memory for basically words and pictures. That's about it. So music really suited the questions I was asking. And also starting out as a young professor, it allowed me to be a bit of a bigger fish in a smaller pond, kind of to make my way. But it has been a fortuitous collaboration. The field is now very large. There's 4 or 5 journals entirely devoted to that topic. Wasn't so when I was starting out. Maybe I pushed it a little bit in that direction. But I think one of the advantages of this broad education is that you have the tools to try to understand anything that interests you once you develop those tools. And I think this idea of understanding how people deal with things they can't necessarily verbalize is, in my case, is again very generalizable. Some people have used my work and applied it to things like music therapy, even though that's not a field I'm in. Or I've been collaborating with practitioners. I have collaborators in conservatories now. And one of my current projects is studying the journey of adult non-singers to becoming singers. It's a very kind of applied music education sort of thing, but by having my basic background, that allows me to work with people in the field to bring things full circle. So I think there's not one cut and dried formula, but to have your basic tools. In addition to taking some more courses about the brain, take another course in statistics. I wish I had more background in that, just saying. And that allows you to make intelligent choices about problems that are solvable with what you currently know, maybe less solvable. And that might intersect with where you are in your career as well. So that's some general career advice I think I can give. But yes, it's a lot of fun. At my university, I collaborated with the orchestra conductor, and we put on a program called Science in the Symphony. And we did all science-related music. We chose some of the pieces that are up on the golden records, spinning up in space, and from some composers who are also scientists. And then I collected data on the effect on audiences of repeating a piece on a concert program. So that was really neat. And it's a way of really combining some of your interests once you have the tools at your command.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your reply. And we actually have one more question for Ms. Werfel that was directed toward Ms. Werfel. It was, why do you think there's a shortage of school psychologists, like which was mentioned many times? And they ask, is it not rewarding, or does it not pay well, or is it too challenging?
So I was typing an answer in the chat too. So, but definitely is a rewarding job. It definitely is challenging in a good way. You're not going to make a lot of money if you go into school psychology and you work in public education, but there are great benefits. And just like I was saying, the school calendar, like working with that flow is fantastic. There's a shortage because the federal government and state governments are giving school districts more money for school psychology positions or school social worker positions or school counselor positions, because in our country, we've seen an increase in mental health concerns, as well as in a good way, some reduction of that stigma when it comes to mental health issues. And so people are going to get help at, higher, at a higher frequency, or parents want their kids to get help, or kids want to get help on their own. So there's a need. So there's a demand, but there's a gap in the supply chain right now when it comes to that. Also, graduate school programs for school psychology tend to have smaller cohorts of students. Like in my graduate program, there were only 15 other students in my cohort. And so because graduate programs aren't graduating, they're not graduating enough school psychologists, I guess, to keep up with the demand.
And I just want to add one more thing, that if you have a license to practice, I'm talking about the people who are concerned about the money, they can have their business on the side. And if you are in school system, your schedule does allow you to have your private practice as well. So it kind of balances out as far as the financial aspect is concerned. So I just wanted to add that to it.
All right, that will be all the time we have tonight for questions. Speakers, do you all have any last remarks or something you would want to share with us in the audience?
One of the things I'd like to say is that I'm very open to anyone getting in contact with me if you want to talk more about psychology, about what I do or what the field does. I am more than happy to do that. And you have my contact information, so you can share it with the members of BranchOut. Should get in contact with me. I do work part-time, so I do, as Dr. Barkat, on the other side, I do private work. I'm licensed in Virginia, Washington, D.C., and Michigan, so it allows me to do several other kinds of things outside of working in school psychology. So I'm open to questions or information seekers outside of this meeting. And I really thank you again for providing the audience for psychology so that others can learn more about what we do and to ask questions about it.
Same here. I'll do shameless recruiting for Bucknell, but in addition to that, I have a ResearchGate page, so you can find it, links to my papers there if you'd like to read up on a couple of things that I've done. And also, if anyone is interested in the teaching part, because we do a fair amount of teaching, we didn't really wasn't really so much what we were talking about today. But even though I have no licenses in anything, I'm primarily part of my job. Of course, an important part is also teaching, and I'd be happy to talk to people that might want to combine a career in science and teaching, like I do, and it can be very rewarding, particularly again for people with independent spirits. I will also add that there's some people like me go into industry. We haven't really talked about that, but many of the people that got degrees with me are working for either private companies or the US military, solving problems with their experimental psychology prowess. They don't get to as much to choose their own problems as much, but they work on these fascinating teams, and sometimes they can't even tell me what they're working on. But that's another career path that we haven't actually talked about, but you could consider, industry or government.
Same here. If anybody needs any help and wants to talk about more, my research always have been cross-cultural. So, if anybody interested in looking at the things which are how things work cross-culturally, I'm open to help.
it's an exciting time in your lives. And, you know, I think one thing to remember is that life is, people say life is short. Life is for most of us, thankfully, really long. And so you have lots of opportunities to try different things, work in one area for a few years, go on, you know, try something else, get a different degree, move on. It's just an exciting time, and you don't have to lock yourself in right now to one specific career.
Yeah, so thank you for those final words and remarks. So on behalf of the whole BranchOut career panel team, we hope that everyone has enjoyed the panel this evening and learned a great deal, I'm sure they did, about successful individuals in psychology. And we hope that everyone got a chance to experience the essence of the field, had their questions answered, and maybe even be inspired to pursue or learn more about the career, which I certainly am. The psychology field has been a vital part of our daily lives and will continue to be for ages to come. We're also extremely appreciative of the panelists, Dr. Barkat, Dr. Halpern, Dr. Parker-Lewis, and Ms. Werfel for their time in giving us such great insight into the field. We're also very appreciative of our audience members for making this panel so great and asking wonderful questions. To learn about BranchOut, please check us out at www.bellbranchout.org or like us on Facebook at Veritas Education Leaders. We look forward to seeing you at any events in the future.
Thank you again.
Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.
You're welcome.